The thing about living in a small town is that everyone knows everything, or at least, they think they do. That's what makes it so maddening when something blindsides you. You're supposed to have eyes everywhere. Your neighbor's nosy, your barber's a gossip, and even your mailman offers unsolicited updates about who's doing what. So, when Amanda, my wife of 12 years, came home late one night with a sprained wrist and a wild story about tripping over a curb outside a yoga class, I should have known better. "Didn't you drive to yoga?" I asked, handing her an ice pack. "I parked far away." "There wasn't any space near the studio," she said, wincing as she adjusted the ice on her wrist. "We live in a town where parking's never an issue. It's the kind of place where you can roll out of bed, leave your car running while you grab a coffee, and still find it untouched when you return." Her explanation felt flimsy, but I let it slide. People trip, right? A week later, Amanda mentioned she'd be attending a charity gala that Friday night. It was one of those hoity-toity events she loved: cocktails, schmoozing, silent auctions. I wasn't invited, of course. She claimed the tickets were limited, though she insisted it was no big deal. "You hate those things, Eric. Remember last time? You spent half the night hiding by the shrimp cocktail." Fair point. I did hate those events, but something about this one set my teeth on edge. Her tone was casual, almost too casual, as if she was trying hard to make it sound normal. I shrugged it off. Maybe I was overthinking things. That Friday, while she prepped for her big night, I found myself pacing. I don't know why. Amanda looked incredible in her black dress, hair pinned up, her favorite earrings dangling like tiny chandeliers. She kissed me goodbye, smelling of jasmine and vanilla, and left. It should have been a normal night. But it wasn't. Around 9 p.m., I got a call from my buddy Dave. He's one of those guys who's perpetually on the golf course or at the bar, and this call came from the latter. "Eric, you're never gonna believe this," he slurred, voice thick with beer and mischief. "Spit it out, Dave," I said, rolling my eyes. "Your wife Amanda, she's here. And man, she's not at no charity thing." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "She's here. At the tavern. And, she's not alone." That was the first domino. Dave's words didn't sink in immediately. It was like hearing someone speak through a wall: you catch the tone but not the meaning. "She's not alone," he repeated, this time slower, as if I were a child struggling to grasp something obvious. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. "She's probably meeting someone for the gala," I said, trying to convince both of us. "Networking or—" "Eric," Dave interrupted, his voice losing its drunken humor. "She's here with a guy. They're sitting in a booth at the back. I thought you should know." A dull thud filled my ears as my heart started to pound. The room around me, the muted hum of the TV, the dog asleep at my feet, became an irritating backdrop. I muttered something, maybe a thanks or a got it, and hung up. At that moment, I wasn't angry. Not yet. Instead, a strange, robotic calm overtook me. I grabbed my keys and headed to the tavern. I wasn't even sure what I planned to do: confront her. Confirm what Dave saw? Laugh it off as a misunderstanding? The 20-minute drive felt surreal. I played scenarios in my head, each one more absurd than the last. Maybe she was there with a coworker, planning a surprise. Or maybe Dave was wrong altogether, drunk and seeing things. That's what I told myself, anyway. The parking lot was packed, which wasn't surprising for a Friday night. I found a spot near the edge, barely noticing how far I had to walk. As I approached the entrance, the familiar smell of stale beer and fried food wafted out, a reminder of the many nights I'd spent here with Amanda when we were younger. The nostalgia was short-lived. Inside, the place was alive with laughter and music. The usual crowd of locals filled the bar, shouting over the jukebox or leaning too close to each other in the dim light. I scanned the room quickly, my eyes darting past familiar faces, and then I saw her. Dave was right. Amanda was in a corner booth, sitting across from a man I didn't recognize. He was younger than me, maybe early 30s, clean-shaven with the kind of face you'd find on a magazine cover. He leaned in close, too close, as if whispering something to her. And Amanda, my wife, was laughing. That kind of laughter you don't fake. She tilted her head slightly, a gesture I knew well, the same one she used to do when we first started dating. I didn't storm over. I didn't yell or flip tables. Instead, I found an empty stool at the bar, positioned where I could see them but not be seen. My hands shook as I ordered a beer. I wasn't sure if it was from anger, humiliation, or the adrenaline surging through me. Maybe all three. From my vantage point, it didn't take long to piece things together. The way their knees brushed under the table. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear while he talked. These weren't colleagues or casual acquaintances. This was something else. They ordered drinks, but Amanda barely touched hers, laughing and talking like she didn't have a care in the world. She looked radiant, more alive than I'd seen her in months. That realization cut deeper than I expected. I felt like a ghost watching the life I thought I had play out with someone else at the center. Dave must have spotted me because he sidled up to the bar, a fresh beer in his hand. "You okay, man?" he asked, his voice low. "Fine," I lied, not taking my eyes off the booth. "You want to go over there?" he offered. "I'll back you up." I shook my head. Not yet. I wanted to see how far she'd go. Morbid curiosity, maybe. Or maybe I was holding on to some shred of hope that this wasn't what it looked like. But there's no mistaking certain things, the way her hand lingered on his arm, how she leaned into him as he spoke. They were like teenagers in the throes of a new romance, completely oblivious to the world around them. At one point, the guy slid out of the booth and headed toward the bathroom. That's when I made my move. Amanda didn't see me approach until I was standing right in front of her. Her smile vanished instantly, replaced by a wide-eyed look of shock. "Eric," she stammered, sitting up straighter. "What are you doing here?" I didn't respond right away. Instead, I slid into the seat her companion had vacated and stared at her. "So," I said finally, my voice flat. "Who's your friend?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "It's not what it looks like," she said, finally finding her voice. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "That's original." She glanced toward the bathrooms, probably hoping her date wouldn't walk back into this disaster. "Eric, I can explain." "Go ahead," I said, leaning back in the booth. "I've got time." Her explanation was exactly what you'd expect, vague, stammering, and full of half-truths. She claimed he was a colleague, a friend, someone she'd been meeting to discuss work stuff. But there was no conviction behind her words. No real effort to make me believe her. Maybe she knew it was useless. When her date returned, he stopped dead in his tracks, taking in the scene. To his credit, he didn't try to sit back down or play dumb. Instead, he muttered something about needing to leave and bolted for the door. Coward. Amanda started to stand, but I held up a hand. "Sit," I said, my tone sharp enough to make her freeze. "We're not done." I don't know how long we sat there. Minutes? Hours? Time blurred as I asked the hard questions, the ones I wasn't sure I wanted the answers to. How long had this been going on? How serious was it? Did she love him? Her answers were a mix of denial and deflection. She swore nothing physical had happened, that it was just harmless fun, but her body language told a different story. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She fidgeted with her wedding ring, twisting it around her finger like it was suddenly too tight. When I finally left the bar, I didn't go home. I needed air, space, anything to process what had just happened. My hands were still trembling as I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But something inside me shifted, a heavy, crushing weight that settled in my chest. This wasn't just a bad night. This was the beginning of the end. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my car outside our house, staring at the windows. The lights were off. She had beaten me home, and the house looked peaceful, undisturbed. But I knew better now. The tranquility was fake, a surface-level illusion that crumbled the second you scratched it. I didn't go inside right away. For hours, I sat there, running through everything I'd seen and heard at the tavern. I played back Amanda's stammering explanations, the way she'd twisted her ring and avoided eye contact. She'd lied, that much was clear. What I couldn't decide was how far the lie went or whether I even wanted to know. By the time the sun started to rise, my decision was made. I wasn't going to let this fester. If I didn't confront her now, I'd lose my nerve, and she'd sweep it under the rug like nothing had happened. That couldn't happen. Not this time. I walked into the house just as Amanda was coming down the stairs, her hair wet from a shower. She froze when she saw me, clutching the railing like it might steady her. "You're home early," she said cautiously. "Yeah," I replied, my voice colder than I intended. "We need to talk." She hesitated, then nodded, leading me to the living room. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I stayed standing, looming over her. The power dynamic wasn't lost on either of us. "I want the truth," I said, cutting straight to the point. "No more dodging, no more excuses. Who was that guy last night?" Amanda looked down, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "I told you, he's a friend." "A friend," I repeated, the words dripping with sarcasm. "A friend you meet in secret at a bar, who touches your arm like you're on a first date." Her face flushed, but she didn't respond. "How long has this been going on?" I pressed. "And don't lie to me, Amanda. I'll know if you do." Her silence stretched so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "A few months." I felt my stomach churn. Even though I'd suspected it, hearing her admit it out loud was like a punch to the gut. "A few months," I repeated, pacing the room to keep myself from exploding. "So all those nights you were working late, this is what you were doing?" "It wasn't like that," she said quickly, her voice rising. "It wasn't physical. Do you think that makes it better?" I snapped, rounding on her. "You've been sneaking around behind my back, lying to me, disrespecting our marriage, and you want me to believe it's okay because you didn't sleep with him?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice cracking. "We started talking after work, and it just... I don't know, it got out of hand. But I swear, it never went further than that." I laughed bitterly, running a hand through my hair. "You don't know? That's your excuse? You don't know how you ended up in a bar, giggling with some guy like a love-struck teenager?" Her eyes welled up with tears, but I didn't care. This wasn't the time for her to play the victim. "Eric, please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to hurt me," I echoed. "Do you hear yourself? You didn't think about me at all, Amanda. Not once. You were too busy chasing whatever thrill you were getting from him." Her tears spilled over, but she didn't look away. "I didn't think you'd understand," she said, her voice trembling. "Understand what?" I demanded. "What's there to understand? You're bored? Lonely? Unhappy? You could have come to me, Amanda. We could have worked on it together. Instead, you went to him." "I didn't plan this," she insisted. "It just happened." "Things don't just happen," I shot back. "You made choices, Amanda. You chose to spend time with him. You chose to lie to me. And now you expect me to what? Forgive you? Pretend it never happened?" "I don't know what I expect," she admitted, her voice small. I don't want to lose you." I stared at her, struggling to reconcile the woman sitting in front of me with the one I thought I married. The Amanda I knew wouldn't do this. She wouldn't lie, wouldn't betray me. But maybe that Amanda never existed. Maybe this was who she'd been all along, and I was just too blind to see it. "Why?" I asked finally. "Why him?" She hesitated, then sighed. "I don't know. He made me feel noticed. Like I mattered. Her words cut deeper than I expected. You don't think I notice you? I asked, my voice quieter now but still laced with anger. It's not the same, she said. We've been together so long, Eric. Sometimes it feels like, I don't know, like we're just going through the motions. And that's my fault? I said, my anger flaring again. You think I haven't felt that way too? You think I haven't wondered what happened to us? But I didn't go looking for someone else, Amanda. I stayed, and I fought for us. Her shoulders shook as she sobbed into her hands, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I need space, I said finally. I can't do this right now. Eric, please, she begged, reaching for me, but I stepped back. I'll be staying at Dave's for a few days, I said, grabbing my keys. Don't call me. As I walked out the door, her sobs followed me, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I did, I might lose whatever resolve I had left. For the first time in my marriage, I was truly alone. The first night at Dave's passed in a blur. He didn't push for details, just handed me a beer, turned on some mindless action movie, and let me sit in silence. I appreciated that. By the second day, though, I felt like I was drowning in my own thoughts. My mind was a battlefield, with anger, humiliation, and heartbreak taking turns tearing through me. I kept replaying Amanda's words, trying to find some hidden meaning or excuse that made sense. But nothing did. Her justification, if you could call it that, felt hollow, insulting even. And every time I thought about the guy, my blood boiled. By the third day, anger had fully replaced sadness. I couldn't keep sitting in Dave's spare room, stewing in my misery. I needed to do something. Anything. Amanda had turned our marriage into a joke, and I wasn't going to be the punchline. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. I'd never needed one before, but I wasn't about to walk blindly into whatever came next. Amanda had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her waltz out of this unscathed. My lawyer, Jill, was efficient and no-nonsense. After hearing the basics of what happened, she told me what I needed to do next: document everything. Gather evidence. Protect myself financially. Eric, this isn't about revenge, Jill said. This is about making sure you come out of this intact. Emotionally and legally. I thanked her, but in the back of my mind, revenge was still on the table. That night, I started with Amanda's laptop. She rarely changed her passwords, and sure enough, I got in on the first try. I wasn't sure what I was looking for: emails, photos, messages. Anything that proved just how deep her betrayal went. It didn't take long to find what I needed. Her inbox was a treasure trove of damning evidence. There were emails from her so-called friend, each one more personal and intimate than the last. They talked about everything: work, their favorite movies, even their connection. He wrote like a lovesick teenager, and Amanda ate it up. I forwarded the emails to myself, saving them in a folder Jill had told me to create. Then I kept digging. Amanda's social media accounts were next, and while there wasn't anything blatantly incriminating, there were plenty of subtle hints, likes, comments, inside jokes with him. She wasn't even trying to hide it. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer: she thought I was too blind or too trusting to notice. The next day, I decided to take things further. I drove to her workplace, parking a block away so I wouldn't be spotted. I wasn't there to cause a scene, at least, not yet. I just wanted to see her and maybe catch a glimpse of her friend. It didn't take long. Around lunchtime, Amanda walked out of the building with him. He was even smugger in person, his face annoyingly perfect, his posture reeking of self-assurance. They didn't touch, but the way they leaned toward each other, laughing at some private joke, told me everything I needed to know. I snapped a few photos from my car and drove away, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The images felt like the final nail in the coffin, proof that this wasn't just a misunderstanding or a one-time lapse in judgment. This was deliberate. Calculated. The next few days were spent preparing. I met with Jill again, showing her the emails and photos I'd collected. She commended me for keeping my cool and advised me to keep documenting everything. Then she dropped a bombshell. Eric, if you want to pursue a divorce, you need to think about the house. Do you want to keep it? I hadn't even thought about the house. It was ours, yes, but I'd always assumed it was more hers. She'd picked it out, decorated it, made it feel like home. But now? Now it felt like a symbol of everything she'd destroyed. I'll think about it, I told Jill. But in the back of my mind, I'd already made up my mind. The following Friday, I decided to test Amanda's boundaries. I returned home while she was at work, letting myself in with my key. The house was eerily quiet, and for a moment, I felt like a stranger in my own life. I went straight to our bedroom and started packing. Clothes, shoes, personal items. I left most of my things, focusing on what I needed to get by. But I didn't stop there. On a whim, I decided to hit Amanda where it hurt. She loved her routines, her carefully curated space. So, I moved things. I switched the placement of her shoes, rearranged the kitchen cabinets, even swapped the contents of her bedside drawer with mine. It wasn't much, but it felt like reclaiming a small piece of control. Before leaving, I left a note on the kitchen counter. It wasn't angry or emotional, just blunt. Amanda. I came by to grab a few things. I'll be staying elsewhere until we figure this out. Eric. I imagined her reaction when she got home, the mix of confusion and anger as she realized she couldn't spin this situation any longer. It was a small victory, but I'd take it. Over the weekend, I made my next move. Using the evidence I'd gathered, I drafted a carefully worded email to Amanda's boss. It wasn't malicious, just factual. I explained the situation, attaching the incriminating emails and photos. I didn't demand action, but I made it clear that her behavior was unprofessional and damaging to the company's reputation. I didn't stop there. Amanda's parents had always been supportive of our marriage, treating me like one of their own. So, I decided they deserved to know the truth. I drove to their house unannounced, sitting down with her mother and father to explain everything. They were shocked, her mother tearing up as her father shook his head in disbelief. She'll regret this, her father said firmly. I raised her better than this. Hearing that felt like validation, a reminder that I wasn't crazy or overreacting. Amanda had betrayed not just me, but the life we'd built together. By the time I returned to Dave's, I felt something I hadn't felt in days, a sense of control. I wasn't just sitting back and letting Amanda dictate the narrative. I was taking charge, setting the stage for whatever came next. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. But it was justice. And for now, that was enough. The email to Amanda's boss was a calculated strike, one I didn't take lightly. By Monday afternoon, the consequences began to unfold. Dave handed me my phone, his face unreadable. She's been calling non-stop, he said. Might want to deal with it. Sure enough, I had over 20 missed calls and even more texts from Amanda. I scrolled through them quickly. Most were the same, pleading to talk, asking what I had done, alternating between anger and desperation. The last one stood out. We need to talk now. Please, Eric. I'm home. I decided to give her what she wanted. Not because I was feeling generous, but because I was ready to see this through. This wasn't just about her guilt or her tears, it was about what came next. When I arrived at the house, Amanda was waiting for me. She stood in the doorway, her face pale and drawn, as though she hadn't slept. Eric, she started, but I brushed past her into the living room. If we were going to do this, I wanted neutral ground, not the kitchen where we'd cooked together or the bedroom that felt tainted now. She followed me, wringing her hands. Why are you doing this? She asked as I sat down on the couch. Doing what? I asked calmly. Holding you accountable? You're upset because people know the truth? Amanda flinched, but she quickly recovered. You had no right to involve my boss, my parents. I had every right, I interrupted. You didn't think about the consequences when you were sneaking around with your coworker. Don't act surprised now. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but I didn't waver. I wasn't here to console her. This isn't just about what you did, Amanda. It's about what you destroyed. She sank into the chair across from me, her hands shaking. I know I hurt you, she said. But you're blowing this out of proportion. I told you it wasn't physical. That's your defense? I asked, my voice sharper now. That you didn't have sex with him? Do you think that makes it better? Less humiliating? I didn't mean for it to get this far, she said, her voice cracking. I was stupid. I was lonely. Lonely? I repeated. Is that supposed to excuse everything? I've been here, Amanda. I've been present. You're the one who checked out. Her tears spilled over, and for a moment, she looked so small, so vulnerable. But I couldn't let myself soften. Not this time. What do you want, Amanda? I asked finally. Why did you call me here? She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. I want us to fix this. I want to make it right. I laughed bitterly. Make it right? How, exactly? You can't undo what you did. You can't erase the lies, the betrayal. You can't pretend it never happened. I'll do anything, she said, leaning forward. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Please, Eric. Don't throw us away. You threw us away the moment you let him into your life, I said, standing. And honestly, I don't know if I can ever forgive you for that. She stood too, blocking my path. Eric, please, she begged. I made a mistake, but I love you. I love our family. Doesn't that count for something? Love? I said, incredulous. You don't get to claim love, Amanda. Not after what you've done. Her face crumpled, and she sank back into the chair, sobbing. But her tears didn't move me. I'd spent days grieving for our marriage, for the life I thought we had. Now, I felt something closer to clarity. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice steady. I've already started the process. Her sobs stopped abruptly, and she looked up at me, stunned. What? No, Eric, you don't mean that. I do, I said. This isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about what's left of my self-respect. I deserve better than this. Think about the girls, she said desperately. Do you really want to break up our family? Don't, I warned, my tone icy. Don't use them as a shield. You didn't think about them when you were sneaking around, and you don't get to use them now. She opened her mouth to argue, but I raised a hand, cutting her off. I'll make sure they're taken care of. That's my priority now, not fixing something you've already broken. The room was silent except for her quiet sobs. I felt a pang of guilt, but I shoved it aside. This wasn't about sparing her feelings anymore. This was about taking control of my life. I'll be staying at Dave's for now, I said. I'll come back for my things later. Eric, she started, but I didn't let her finish. Goodbye, Amanda. I left the house without looking back, my chest heavy but my mind clear. This wasn't the resolution I wanted, but it was the one I needed. After leaving Amanda sobbing in the living room, I didn't go back to Dave's right away. Instead, I parked in an empty lot on the edge of town and sat in silence, staring out at nothing. For the first time since this mess began, the anger had ebbed. In its place was an overwhelming numbness, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes even breathing feel like a chore. I'd made my decision, divorce, but the finality of it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the end of everything I'd built. I sat there for what felt like hours before my phone buzzed on the dashboard. It was a text from Jill, my lawyer. I've filed the initial paperwork. Let's discuss next steps when you're ready. Stay strong. Seeing it in writing hit me differently. It made the situation feel real in a way that nothing else had. This wasn't just a fight or a temporary separation, it was the beginning of the end. I texted her back a simple thank you and turned my phone off. For the first time in days, I didn't want to talk to anyone. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of logistics and legalities. I moved out of Dave's place and into a short-term rental across town. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom with outdated carpeting and creaky plumbing, but it was mine. I didn't take much with me, just the essentials, clothes, a few personal items, and my laptop. I wanted as little of Amanda's influence in my new space as possible. Amanda, for her part, was relentless. She texted and called almost daily, alternating between apologies, anger, and pleas for reconciliation. I ignored most of them, forwarding anything relevant to Jill. My focus was on the girls. They deserved as much stability as I could give them, and I refused to let them get caught in the crossfire. I met with them every weekend, taking them out for lunch or to the park. Sarah, the older one, was old enough to sense something was wrong. She didn't ask directly, but her questions were pointed. "Are you and Mom okay?" she asked once, her wide brown eyes searching mine for answers I didn't want to give. "We're figuring things out," I told her, which was technically true. "But no matter what happens, we both love you and your sister. That will never change." She nodded, but the way her face fell told me she wasn't satisfied with my answer. Lizzie, my younger daughter, was blissfully unaware. At 8 years old, her world still revolved around school and playdates. I envied her innocence. Amanda finally stopped calling when Jill sent over the separation agreement. It wasn't particularly harsh standard 50-50 custody, no spousal support since Amanda worked full-time, but it was enough to send her spiraling. She called me that evening, her voice trembling with controlled rage. "You're really doing this," she said, not as a question but as a statement. "You're tearing apart our family." "You tore it apart," I replied calmly. "I'm just dealing with the aftermath." "You're not even trying to work this out," she accused. "You're running away." "Trying?" I repeated, incredulous. "Amanda, I tried. I spent years trying." "What did you do?" "You lied. You cheated. You didn't care about fixing anything until you got caught." "I made a mistake," she said, her voice rising. "And I've apologized. How much more do you need?" "It's not about apologies," I said, tired of having the same argument. "It's about trust. And I can't trust you anymore." There was silence on the other end, followed by a muffled sniffle. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost pleading. "What about the girls? Don't you think they deserve parents who stay together?" "They deserve parents who are honest," I said. "And happy." "We're not either of those things, Amanda." She didn't reply, and I hung up before the conversation could circle back into more blame and regret. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself adjusting to my new life. The girls spent alternating weekends with me, and I made a point to keep things as normal as possible when they were around. We baked cookies, watched movies, and worked on school projects. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for now. Work became my refuge. The structured chaos of managing projects kept my mind occupied, giving me a break from the emotional weight of everything else. My co-workers were supportive without being invasive, and for that, I was grateful. Amanda continued to fight the divorce, dragging her feet on signing the papers. Jill assured me this was normal, part of the emotional fallout, but it didn't make it any less frustrating. I wanted closure, a clean break that let me move forward. But Amanda seemed determined to stall, as if delaying the inevitable could somehow change the outcome. The turning point came unexpectedly. One evening, as I was sorting through old photos to send to the girls, I found a picture from our wedding day. Amanda looked radiant, her smile wide and genuine. I stared at the photo for a long time, trying to reconcile the woman in the picture with the one who had betrayed me. I realized then that I'd been holding on to anger because it was easier than feeling the pain beneath it. Anger gave me a purpose, a way to justify my actions. But it wasn't sustainable. If I wanted to move forward, I had to let go. The next day, I called Amanda. "I'll take the house," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "You can have the savings and your car. Let's finalize this." She was quiet for a moment. "You want the house?" she asked, surprised. "It's not about the house," I said. "It's about moving on." She sighed. "Okay. It was the first time we'd agreed on anything since this started. The divorce was finalized a month later. Amanda kept her job and her car. I kept the house and my peace of mind. The girls adjusted better than I expected, splitting their time between us without much fuss. It wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was manageable. Looking back, I wouldn't call the experience a blessing in disguise. It was painful, messy, and left scars I'll carry for a long time. But it taught me something important: I'm stronger than I thought. I can survive betrayal, rebuild my life, and still be a good father. As for Amanda, I don't know what her future holds. We're civil for the sake of the girls, but our connection ends there.